Hi all, Lisa here from Mindful Tarot, and I have been not doing much in the way of social media for the past month or so, since early August. Just things got kind of crazy at work, but I have been a little bit obsessed in the world of exploring this question of kind of 1970s vintage tarot, and having a really a really fun time with eBay and Etsy and diving into information from the Eclectic Tarot Forum, and a lot of great posts. Mary K. Greer, a lot of. I mean, there's a lot of information out there, particularly a lot of information out there about the Rider-Waite U.S. Games deck. Less information out there about other vintage decks, which I'm really interested in, like the Aquarian Tarot, the Morgan Greer, also sort of 1970s moments in tarot history, or for the Thoth deck. I mean, there's information out there, but there's huge amounts of information about this guy. So it's not like it's this research project that's incredibly onerous and difficult. But it takes a little bit of digging and diving, and there's a lot of competing information, and so I feel like this is really a kind of works in progress. Okay, that said, what I really want to do today is share some of the decks that I have acquired over the past 6 weeks, yeah, and just share what I've been thinking about. So it all started for me with the blue box. This is a deck that's a little bit hard to come by in the States, much easier to come by in the UK. Kasia Tafalarota has a beautiful, she scored a really, really beautiful earlier version of this. Hers, I think, is pretty clearly the 1972 deck. I think this is more like 1973. The green wreath is a giveaway. The fact that it's 3 Fitzroy Square, Ryder and Company, it doesn't refer to Waddington. This is a lovely, lovely deck. My version of it is really nice. I have a unboxing of it below. Really pristine little white book that has sort of sepia-toned printing in it. The little white book is different text than what we see in the Rider-Waite, and has a different image on the front. And the cardstock is not shiny, has a slight laminated feel, very silky, right? Thick. Mine are, as you can see, mine are a little cocked, but the colors are muted. This is not one of the Blushing Fool decks, although I think there are some blue box versions of the Blushing Fool, but you can see that the skin tones are creamy. We don't have that kind of blotchiness in the Fool and the High Priestess that you'll see in the quote-unquote Blushing Fool decks, but it's quite, the shading is quite subtle. The wand is green, the belt is blue, and the hilt of the sword is also this kind of blue. Notice the ways in which the shading in the Magician's shirt or in the High Priestess's skirt, it's so this isn't like super refined shading. That's not what this deck gives us. But in later versions of this, the white that you see in the skirt and its relationship to the blue becomes less subtle, higher contrast as the reproduction of the imagery, the process of reproduction is less refined. So things that are really, and I hope my computer's picking this up, but the coloring and the shading, especially in the blues and the water, the relationship between the blue and the white. These are things that in these early decks are really noticeable. I'm also quite fond of the color blue that we get in the Hermit. It's kind of a gray blue. This isn't, I think my screen isn't picking it up, so it's looking more robin's egg on my screen. But if you compare it to the sky blue here, hold on, if you can see that that blue is a different blue, a more gray blue. Okay, so those are some of the things about this early deck. So I'm thinking mine's 1973, 1974, somewhere before 1975, which is when US Games really starts pushing on the copyright. 2 blank cards in this deck. My next oldest deck is this guy. Okay, so this is now, you know, post 1971, US Games in this country starts producing this deck, and initially there's no copyright anywhere. Notice how this band is white as opposed to, I'll just show you a later version, the gray. Sometimes people talk about this as the sunburned magician deck. So if you look at how red this guy's face is, as opposed to the creamy flesh tone here. Okay, so no copyright, no ISBN number, printed in Switzerland. This is not the first edition of the yellow box US Games. And in fact, if you're looking for a Blushing Fool edition, I think what you're going to be looking for, I tried to snag this on eBay, and it went up to $165. You know, no way am I going to spend that kind of money on a deck. You know, for me, it's like I want to be able to get a deck for like $30, and you can get decks like this for $30. You have to be, you know, you just have to know what you're looking for. So it's not the oldest version, but this is the uncopyrighted version. The older version, as far as I'm understanding it, sort of when this first gets issued, I'm just looking at my notes here. I mean, there's Sam Weiser, got that written down somewhere. The Sam Weiser sort of 1971 deck. I think those are the places where you're also going to find the Blushing Fool. And the Little White Book will be a different Little White Book than what comes with this version. Now this version, which I'm thinking is 1973-ish, this is what the Little White Book looks like. This address, 468 Park Avenue South. Other tells here. So when I look at the extra cards, again, 2 blank white cards. This deck is, I really cannot distinguish either the cardstock or the imagery from my blue box. It's really, really, really comparable. Maybe the cardstock in this one is slightly creamier, not creamier, silkier. This feels a little bit more matte. This, you probably can't pick this up. I'm sorry. I am getting left and right confused. You probably can't pick this up at all. But let's see if I can get this is the blue box. And you see how it's reflecting the light? This is the other one. And it's not reflecting the light as much. It's not quite as glossy. So actually, I think that the blue box is a little glossier than the first yellow box US Games. Okay, I prefer the more matte, actually. I love my blue box. I love, love, love it. But in some ways, this version of the yellow box, again, I'm thinking this is like 1973, 1974. I think it's really the nicest in terms of the cardstock. I like the matte feel. Now this one is just pristine. It is in beautiful shape. The Little White Book, it feels like it has never really been used. It came in this box set, and I think this is the second version of this box set, and I think that I don't have the full dates for this. And I'm thinking that just based on the price, which is $10.95 for the box set. It comes with 3 books. The books have all been red. You can tell because the spine is cracked. well, this one, The Sexual Key to the Tarot, oddly enough, doesn't look like they read it. The Tarot Revealed, this book first came out in 1960. I think these two first came out in 71. This one, Mastering the Tarot, is a first printing, and it looks like it's a first printing 11th impression. If I can read, I don't know. I have to ask my hubby. Trying to read the impression numbering, but it's first printing 1973. So I'm just gonna say this set is 1973, 1974-ish, and I don't think they used the cards. I think they read the books, or at least two of the books, and I don't think they much used the cards. So these cards are in beautiful shape. The box is a little bit, these tuck boxes, these early tuck boxes are really tight, so it's really hard to kind of keep getting the cards out. And so the box itself is a little bit injured, but the cards are in beautiful shape. I have a really similar version of this deck. I scored this box on eBay for 20 bucks. This is so cool. It's, you know, solid wood box, and it seamlessly holds a deck that has the same, seems like it's the same vintage, but this deck is much more used. The cards are still in really nice shape, but the edges are gray, and the whole thing smelled a little bit like cigarettes. So this is, I actually use this deck. The other one I kind of keep tucked away. But this I feel okay shuffling because it's, you know, this is a whoops, as I drop it all. This is a very I'm just dropping cards right now. A well-used, well-loved deck. But again, it's that kind of matte, really nice matte cardstock. I actually think that the 10 of Cups is an interesting card to look at. Look how soft that blue is. We'll come back to that in a bit because that blue gets less and less soft. So I think those decks are like if this is 1973-ish, these yellow decks also 1973, the sort of sunburned magician decks. And the magician isn't sunburned on the card inside, but just he looks normal. But on the front cover, so he looks normal here. But on the box itself, he looks sunburned. Okay, next up. So this box, notice how the magician isn't sunburned. The bottom edge is gray as opposed to white. The language on the sides is the same. And on the back, it's the same, except for this ISBN, okay? So that's different, and that's different. This is no longer a dark green, whoops. But the hilt of the sword is blue, and it's a lighter blue, but it's blue, and the belt is blue. His face isn't sunburned, but the box otherwise looks really similar. Other thing I want to point out, still no copyright on the box itself. So we have an ISBN, we have darker gray, we have a lighter green, we have no sunburn, and everything else looks the same. Now, if you go on eBay and you see something like this, then you'll want to also see what they have for this. And notice this is 38 East 32nd Street. So it's not the Park Avenue address, which was 468 Park Avenue. It's the next address for US Games before it moves to Stamford. This, you can't necessarily see it here, but this is also a little glossy. It's not matte paper. Now, when I go into the deck, my two extra cards, one is blank, and the other one has information on it. And notice where it says the Encyclopedia of Tarot. It says volumes 1 and 2. That tells me that this deck was published somewhere between 1986, when Volume 2 of Stuart Kaplan's encyclopedia came out, and 1990, when Volume 3 came out. Let me just double check that it's 1990. I believe that that is correct. Somewhere I have this written down, and I will tell you as soon as I can find it. Volume 3 is 1990, right. One thing to know, actually, this is printed out. This was pointed out by, I think, Fulgore is his name, or his handle, or her handle on Eclectic Tarot. So, you know, you look at the white book, and this white book, some of them will have information about like a date or something in the inside. This one does not, but there might be other tells in it, like this one talks about the Encyclopedia of Tarot, and here it just says, you know, it says just the Encyclopedia of Tarot, as if there's only one. Well, there were 4 volumes. So you might be tempted, as I have in the past, to try to date a deck by what's going on in the white book. But one of the things that was pointed out on one of the forums, which I think is really interesting, is if you think about like a publisher producing a whole bunch of white books, the white books in the old decks, if you buy a new deck, the white book is shrink wrapped in with the deck of cards itself. So you'll buy a new deck, say, you know, the brand new, you know, Rider-Waite-Smith. This is a brand new deck. And it all came with the white book and the cards shrink wrapped together, right? Old ones, it's clear that they just had the deck shrink wrapped and the white book shrink wrapped, I mean, not shrink wrapped, separate, and then they put them together in the box. So if you think that you have you're a publisher and you're printing a bunch of white books to put in with decks, you might have a box of white books. White books are smaller, they're little bitty things, than decks, which are big. What was pointed out is that probably publishers have many, many older editions of the white books than they do of the decks. So they might not be the same vintage. In fact, we might expect the little white books that come with these vintage decks to be slightly older than the decks, because you're going through your box of little white books that you published like 3 years ago, and your other crate of decks, which you just received shipped into you from Switzerland last week, right? And so they'd be out of sync. Does this make any sense? Little white book, probably older than the deck it came with in these vintage decks, okay? So I don't try to use the little white book for dating of the decks anymore. But this does tell me, this information, that this is not after 1990, that it's between 1986 and 1990. So that makes sense to me. If I'm thinking, you know, oh, another really important point. So these have copyrights on them. They don't have copyrights on the box, but they have a copyright. See if you can see that right side up. A copyright on the card. But the copyright just says 1971 US Games. It's not as extensive a copyright as you start to see in the 90s. So this is a modern deck. The copyright here doesn't just say 1971. This one said, well, maybe it's the same, says the same, but it's just, oh, I guess this is the ink next to it. It says 1971 US Games Systems Inc. This says 1971 US Games. So the copyright on the brand new ones is more extensive than the copyright on these older decks. So it's really, really easy on eBay to find, for a good price, these decks that don't have the copyright next to the little registered copyright next to deck, that do have the darker gray, that were probably late 80s, and that have really nice cardstock. Now again, this cardstock and the coloring is really comparable to the early blue box deck. I will say that the cardstock of this 1980s deck is, Sorry, that's not the 1980s deck. I'm getting all catawampus here. Here it is. I will say that this cardstock is maybe slightly more laminated, and the yellow is slightly more orange. It's subtle. It's very subtle. But for my money, I don't really care about the tiny copyright that you get on the 1980s deck. For my money, the 1973-74 decks are the nicest, but the difference is really small. So if you're out there and you want a vintage deck, these that have the ISBN on them, no barcode on the bottom, they're really nice and they're not expensive and they're not hard to come by. Okay? I think they're a good target to go for. Okay, my next oldest deck, really similar, slightly different. Okay, the box looks similar, very similar to what I just showed you. There's no copyright next to the deck, the word deck, but the ISBN is no longer on the back. Instead, we have a barcode. We now have moved to Connecticut. We still have, this is still probably prior to 1990 because it says the Encyclopedia of Tarot, volumes 1 and 2. But now we are glossy. We're not super laminated, but we're glossy, and there's a decided orangification of the yellows. There's absolutely, when I was talking about the blues and the whites, so here's the slightly later one after they're in Stamford. See how you can see it's a little shiny? And look at how sharp the contrast is between the blue and the white in the gradation. It's more subtle here. The blue is softer. The main difference, I think, is the blue is softer. So if you look at the one here, the blue is softer. The contrast is less intense. It also seems to me as if the white margin is bigger. No, maybe not. Slightly bigger on the newer. So to kind of sum this piece up, I would say, you know, if you start to see the ISBN, these are still printed in Switzerland, supposedly, but something shifted. The cardstock is a little different, or at least the lamination is different, the coloring is different. And I think this might have to do, well, I'm not exactly sure, because there was a shift in the 90s where A.G. Muller started working, was bought out by Cartamundi, and I think things started to get printed in Belgium. I don't know if that's the shift. These boxes still say that everything's printed in Switzerland, but the difference between the ISBN on the side and the barcode on the bottom is the difference for me between a deck that I really, really love and a deck that's like, no, this is nice, this is good. Okay. What else? Okay, so the next level up, I mean, there's stuff in the 2000s, in the 1990s and the 2000s. I don't have any examples of those decks, but I will say that the next thing to happen is the shift to Belgium, and then after that, the shift to printing in Italy. When Cartamundi buys A.G. Muller, I think that's when there's a shift toward international printing of the Rider-Waite deck and this movement away from Pamela Colman Smith's handwritten titles on the trumps and toward a mechanical font, which allows there to be less difference between the different languages. So if it's not in English, it doesn't look really different. I'm looking over at my desk over here, and there's like like this just sea of very similar looking Rider-Waite-Smith decks, and now I don't know which is which, so everything's confused and catawampus. But I think I wanted to show you a deck that I just bought from, Amazon. Now this is the Made in Italy. You can also get Made in China decks. I have a friend who has a, yellow box recently published deck, and it's like completely plasticky, and this one is not. So I'm not sure if anyone knows about the ones that you can just buy if you buy it from Amazon now or from a store, what the differences are. When I bought this, I wanted to have something to compare everything to, and I thought it would be disgusting and yucky and I would hate it. And it's actually, it's not so bad. One thing to notice, other people have commented on this, if you see when I hold the side of the modern version up, notice how uniform the coloring is because of the ways in which the printing of the backs is now managed. So we've now, you can see, I can just, any of these, if you see the difference between this plaid back and how regularized and how high contrast it is on the contemporary one, that's what yields that regularity when you look at it from the side. And it's, it's a whole different kind of backing. It just has a whole different feel to it because of that high contrast. You can even see, like, if you look at my computer screen, how it's kind of doing the wow effect. Do you know what I mean? It's like vibrating because of the ways in which the printing process has been managed. Okay, so, this is now the mechanical writing of the titles. The coloring is, not substantially different than it was on this late 80s, early 90s version. The coloring is a little bit more orange and intense. The shades are, shading is less subtle. See how it really looks like just streaks of blue and white. Look at the High Priestess, it just, like a whole level of subtlety that's lost in the modern decks. And, where I see it in ways that's really unpleasant for me is, I don't know if this shows up here, but the sort of the blues are kind of this much, it's really present in the wands. It's like this really deep kind of, it looks to me like comics in the, Sunday comics, like the blue is just this really corn silky blue, and the contrast with the browns and the greens, it's like it lost subtlety. But I have to say, this isn't as bad. I'd resisted buying a modern one until I wanted to be able to compare it to my vintage ones, and it wasn't as terrible as I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be really plasticky. I thought it was going to be like my Albano Weight that I recently bought, which is just plastic. Like you could spill, your Coca-Cola on it and it would be fine because it's plastic and it would just roll off. This isn't plastic, it's just highly laminated. Okay, there are a bunch of other things to look at because I have some mini decks that I want to talk about, but I think this is a long enough video and perhaps extensive enough and perhaps boring enough. So I'm going to stop here and yeah, and we'll share more at some other point. I hope you've appreciated my journey as much as I've enjoyed sharing it with you. I have to say that through this process, I have just become deeply in love with the Rider-Waite-Smith deck in a way that has made it, I don't know. It just, there's some kind of hanging out with these images, seeing the slight gradations of difference, feeling the cardstock, having this access to, the past few decades of tarot users who've had these cards and thinking about how they ended up on eBay and whether they were well loved, playing with my, where's my wood box? Oops. Oh well, wherever my wood box is, oh, here it is. My my wood box and my really well loved deck that has the yellow sides because somebody manipulated this so much. You know, I mean, I just, I love the grays in this vintage deck. And back to like, just look at how, you know, when it's those subtle colorings. Oh, anyway, I really loved it, really bonded with it. And again, you know, I say aim for this deck if you can get it with the white on the bottom. But if you can't, this version with the ISBN on the back, I think is a wonderful, wonderful version. And you can get that for, if you're lucky, under $30 on eBay. Okay, peace out.